I'm Celine, and this is the story of how I discovered what family means, and what it costs when the people you love betray the one who loved them most. It was a Thursday afternoon in October, and I was sitting in my corner office on the 42nd floor of a glass tower in downtown Chicago. The promotion I'd worked toward for 3 years was finally within reach. My manager had scheduled a celebration dinner for Saturday night, where she'd announce my new role as senior director in front of half the team. I'd bought a new dress, made reservations at the city's most exclusive restaurant, and even had my hair appointment booked. But first, I had to drive to Houston for Grandma's 75th birthday. The small wrapped box on my desk caught the afternoon light, a handmade bracelet I'd ordered from Etsy, personalized with tiny charms representing all the moments we'd shared. A little house for her home, a book for all the stories she'd told me, a heart because she'd always said I had the biggest one in the family. My phone buzzed. A text from Mom. Plans changed. Don't bother coming. I stared at the screen, reading the words twice then 3 times. My coffee had gone cold in my hands, and outside, the Chicago skyline stretched endlessly under a gray October sky. 4 words, no explanation, no apology, straight to voicemail. Typical. Mom never liked confrontation, never liked having to explain herself. I glanced at the clock. 4:27 p.m. Grandma's birthday dinner was supposed to start at 6:00 p.m. Houston time. Just 10 people, she'd said. Nothing big, just family. My hands shook as I dialed Grandma's number directly. Hello, sweetheart. Her voice was smaller than usual, stretched thin like old elastic. Grandma, I just got Mom's text. What's going on? A pause so long I thought the line had dropped. Then, honey, don't worry about it, I got mixed up. They're not coming. Something came up. Her voice cracked on the last word, and I felt something cold settle in my chest. Who's not coming? Grandma. She tried to laugh, but it came out brittle like glass breaking. All of them. But it's okay, it's just me here. Just a little cake. Don't drive all the way here for nothing, sweetheart. I'm fine. I hung up and stared at my desk. The promotion dinner invitation lay beside my computer, embossed with gold lettering. The culmination of years of 12-hour days, missed weekends, and sacrificed relationships. Everything I'd worked for. But something was wrong. Grandma's voice, the way she'd said, just a little cake, it haunted me. I could picture her house. The small dining room with the round table she'd inherited from her mother, the pink embroidered napkins that said, family first. The mismatched chairs she'd collected over decades. Never quite enough for everyone but always set up hopefully. Then I made a mistake. I opened Instagram. There they were, posted just an hour earlier, my mother, my 2 brothers and their wives. My aunts, all dressed in pristine white, holding champagne glasses against the backdrop of endless blue Mediterranean water. Their faces were sun-kissed and radiant, wind-blown hair perfectly tousled. The caption read, "Family time is precious. Living our best lives." My phone clattered to the desk. They hadn't forgotten. They hadn't cancelled because of some emergency. They had lied. Grandma wasn't forgotten, she'd been deliberately abandoned. I scrolled through the comments. Gorgeous family, so blessed, goals, heart emojis and sailing emojis, and champagne glasses. 23 comments from people celebrating their perfect family vacation. The family vacation had left a 75-year-old woman sitting alone at a table set for 10. Something snapped inside me. I looked at my promotion dinner invitation, at the speech I'd prepared, at the new dress hanging on my office door. None of it mattered. Not anymore. I grabbed my keys and walked out. The drive from Chicago to Houston is normally 11 hours. I made it in 9, stopping only for gas and coffee that tasted like burnt water. The highways blurred past in a haze of rage and disbelief, my thoughts a chaotic mix of memories and realizations. I remembered being 8 years old at a family reunion, standing in the corner while Mom introduced me to a distant cousin as the extra one. Not embarrassed, just matter of fact, like saying the sky was blue. I remembered how Grandma had pulled me aside that night, slipping a handmade bracelet into my palm. Nothing fancy, just colorful beads strung together with love. Sometimes, she'd whispered, being last means you're the surprise. I'd worn that bracelet until the string broke when I was 12. Grandma had kept it in her jewelry box, promising to restring it someday. Had she ever? Did she still have it? The sun was setting by the time I reached Houston's suburbs, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that reminded me of Grandma's living room walls. I'd always thought those colors were too bright, too cheerful. Now I understood. She'd been trying to hold on to light in a house that had grown too dark. Her neighborhood looked the same as it had when I was a child: neat lawns, weathered fences, the occasional wind chime fluttering in the evening breeze. But something felt different. The houses seemed smaller, shabbier. Or maybe I was just seeing them through adult eyes that had learned to notice what money could and couldn't buy. I pulled into her driveway at 8:47 p.m., according to the dashboard clock. The engine ticked as it cooled, and I sat there for a moment, staring at the house. Most of the windows were dark, but I could see a faint glow coming from the kitchen. Through the window, I saw her. Grandma sat at her dining room table, back straight despite her age, facing an empty room. The cake sat untouched in the center of the table. A simple vanilla cake with white frosting. Probably made from the same recipe she'd used for 40 years. 75 candles had been lit and blown out, their wax now pooling on the frosting in colorful circles. 10 plates were arranged around the table, each with a carefully folded pink napkin that read, "Family First," in delicate script. Napkins she'd probably bought specially for this occasion. 10 chairs pulled out expectantly. 10 sets of silverware gleamed under the overhead light. But only one person sat at that table. She didn't see me watching. Her hands were folded in her lap. And she was staring at the empty chairs as if she could will them to fill with the people she'd loved her entire life. Something was devastating about her posture. The way she held herself upright, maintaining dignity even in abandonment. I wiped my eyes and knocked softly on the front door before letting myself in with the key she'd given me years ago. "Celine, I told you not to come," she said when she looked up, but her voice held relief, not reproach. "Too late," I said, pulling out the chair beside her. The kitchen smelled like vanilla and disappointment. I cut 2 slices of cake, the first pieces that had been taken from it, and placed one in front of Grandma. The frosting was perfect, the cake moist and sweet. She'd spent hours on it, probably getting up early to make sure everything was perfect for her family. "Happy birthday, Grandma," I said, raising my fork. She smiled, but it was a fragile thing, like a flower made of tissue paper. "You didn't have to drive all this way. I know you're busy with work. I'm exactly where I need to be." We ate in silence for a while, the tick of the wall clock marking time that felt suspended between past and present. The cake was delicious, but each bite felt like swallowing sadness. Finally, I couldn't stand it anymore. "Where are they, Grandma?" "Really?" She set down her fork carefully, as if it were made of glass. "Celine, you saw the pictures?" "I saw the lies. Tell me what happened." She was quiet for so long, I thought she might not answer. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, "I paid for it." "Paid for what?" "The cruise." She looked up at me with eyes that held decades of disappointment. "Your mother came to me 3 months ago. Said the family needed healing, that everyone was so busy with their own lives that we never spent time together anymore. She said a cruise would be perfect. 10 days in the Mediterranean, just family." My stomach began to churn. She said it would be expensive but that it would be worth it to have everyone together. She gestured vaguely at the empty chairs. "I paid for all of it. The cabins, the airfare, the excursions. I wanted them to be happy. But you weren't invited." "Oh, I was invited at first. But then your mother said I probably wouldn't enjoy it. Too much walking, too loud, too many strangers. She said I'd be more comfortable at home, and that they'd think of me every day and take lots of pictures to show me." I felt sick. "And you believed her?" I wanted to believe her. I thought maybe if I gave them this gift, this time together, they'd remember how much family matters. Maybe they'd come back and tell me stories about their trip. Maybe we'd look at photos together and laugh. Instead, they'd used her money to celebrate without her, posting pictures of their joy while she sat alone at a table set for 10. I even made their favorite cake. She continued, her voice growing smaller. "I got up at 5 this morning to make sure it was perfect. I set the table with the good china, the plates your grandfather gave me for our wedding. I lit every candle myself, even though my hands shake now." I looked around the dining room, really seeing it for the first time. The good china was indeed out, delicate plates with tiny blue flowers that I remembered from childhood holidays. The silverware was polished to a mirror shine. Fresh flowers sat in a crystal vase, probably picked from her garden that morning. She'd spent her birthday, her 75th birthday, preparing a celebration for people who were sipping champagne on a ship thousands of miles away. "I waited," she said simply. "I waited until almost 8 o'clock, thinking maybe they were running late. Maybe there was traffic. Maybe they'd forgotten to call. But then I realized they weren't coming. They'd never planned to come." After we finished our cake, I helped Grandma clean up the kitchen. She moved slowly, each step deliberate, as if she were carrying a weight I couldn't see. I watched her carefully wrap the leftover cake, enough to feed 8 people who would never eat it. "I think I'll go to bed now," she said, patting my shoulder. Thank you for coming, sweetheart. You didn't have to, but I'm glad you did. I tucked her in, pulling the old quilt up to her chin. She looked impossibly small in the bed, like a child playing dress up in adult clothes. After she fell asleep, I wandered through the house, seeing it with new eyes. It was her house, she'd lived there for 43 years. But it didn't feel like her home anymore. The walls were covered with framed photos, but they were all recent, all featuring my mother and brothers at various family gatherings. Graduations, weddings, holidays. I realized with a start that I was in none of them. When had I stopped being included? When had I become the extra one who didn't make it into the family photos? I was adjusting one of the crooked frames when I noticed something tucked behind the side table, near the kitchen, a small wooden box. Old and dusty, with a tarnished brass latch. Something about it nagged at me. It seemed out of place among my mother's carefully curated decorations. What's that? I'd asked earlier, pointing to the box. Grandma had followed my gaze and her expression had changed, become guarded. Just old things. Nothing important. But the way she'd looked at it, the way she'd quickly changed the subject, suggested it was anything but unimportant. Now, in the quiet of the sleeping house, I found myself drawn to it. I knelt beside the table and carefully lifted the box. It wasn't heavy, but it felt significant in my hands. The latch was stiff with age, but it opened with a soft click. Inside, beneath some old letters and faded receipts, was a manila envelope. The paper was thick, expensive-and yellowed at the edges. Written across the front in my grandfather's precise handwriting were the words, "Last will." My hands trembled as I opened it. The will was straightforward. Everything my grandfather had owned. The house, the rental properties, the savings account, the life insurance policy, had been left to Grandma. But attached to the back, barely hanging on with an old paperclip, was a handwritten codicil dated just months before his death. I read it twice before the words sank in. In the event of my wife's death or incapacitation, all assets shall pass to my granddaughter, Celine Mary Sheridan, as she has shown the greatest devotion to our family and the strongest moral character. Not to my mother. Not to my brothers, to me. I sat back on my heels, staring at the paper. Grandpa had chosen me as his backup heir, had seen something in me that even I hadn't recognized. But more importantly, this will was dated only 2 years ago, long after the documents my mother claimed to have. I heard a soft sound from the bedroom and looked up to find Grandma standing in the doorway, leaning heavily on her walker. "You found it," she said quietly. "Grandma, why did you hide this?" She made her way slowly to the couch and I helped her sit down. For a long moment she just stared at the papers in my hands. I was scared. She finally said, "Your mother said you didn't need the burden, that you had your own life to live. She said it would just cause trouble in the family. But this is my grandfather's will. His wishes. I know." Her voice was barely a whisper. "But I didn't want you to hate me." "Hate you, Grandma? Why would I hate you?" She looked up at me with eyes full of tears. "Because I let them convince me you didn't care. Because I believed them when they said you were too busy for an old woman. Because I signed papers I shouldn't have signed." My blood turned to ice. "What papers?" The next morning, I woke to find Grandma sitting at the kitchen table, a shoe box in front of her. She looked older somehow, as if the night had aged her years instead of hours. "I need to show you something," she said. Inside the box were dozens of documents, some signed, some not, some that looked official and others that were photocopies. My hands shook as I sorted through them. Power of attorney forms with Grandma's signature, but the dates were wrong. Property transfer documents that had been notarized, but the notary seal looked suspicious. Bank account changes that showed my mother as the primary account holder. "When did you sign these?" I asked, holding up a property deed transfer. "I don't remember signing that one," she said, squinting at the paper. "Your mother brought me so many papers over the past few months. She said they were for taxes, for insurance, for legal protection." I trusted her. I found more documents, some with forged signatures that were close to Grandma's handwriting but not quite right. Others had been signed under pretenses. Papers that claimed to be tax documents but were asset transfers. "Grandma, do you remember signing a power of attorney form?" She shook her head. "I don't think so." "What's that?" "It would give Mom complete control over your finances and medical decisions." I never wanted that. I told her I wanted to make my own decisions as long as I could. But according to the documents in the box, my mother had been systematically transferring Grandma's assets to her name. The house, the rental properties, even the savings account. Everything was being moved under the guise of protecting Grandma from the complexities of property management. I picked up my phone and called my mother. It rang 4 times before she answered, her voice bright and cheerful. Well, look who's alive! I thought you'd be too busy celebrating that big promotion to call your old mom. Where's Grandma's house deed? Mom. The silence stretched so long I thought she'd hung up. Celine, what's going on? The deed, the rental properties, the bank accounts. What did you make her sign? Her tone changed. Became careful and measured. Honey, she's old. You know how confused she gets. I'm just trying to help her manage everything. She's not confused, Mom. She's being manipulated. I'm taking care of her, Celine. What do you think I'm doing? You live in Chicago, for God's sake. When's the last time you even visited her? The accusation hit its mark, and I felt a familiar guilt creep up my spine. It was true. I hadn't visited as often as I should have. Work had consumed my life, and the 8-hour drive felt impossible most weekends. That doesn't give you the right to steal from her. Steal. Her voice turned sharp. I'm protecting her assets. Do you have any idea how complicated property management is? How many forms need to be filed? How many taxes need to be paid? Then why didn't you ask me to help? Because you're never here, Celine. You chose your career over your family a long time ago. Don't suddenly pretend to care now. I hung up, my hands shaking with rage. But beneath the anger was something else, a terrible clarity. This wasn't about protecting Grandma. This was about money, about inheritance, about securing assets that were never meant to be my mother's. And I had been complicit in my absence. I spent the rest of the morning on the phone with banks, lawyers, and county offices. What I discovered was both better and worse than I'd feared. The good news: most of the asset transfers were incomplete or fraudulent. Grandma had never actually signed valid power of attorney documents, which meant my mother had no legal right to control her finances. Several of the property transfers had not been notarized correctly, making them legally invalid. The bad news: my mother had been withdrawing money from Grandma's accounts for months, ostensibly for expenses and maintenance, but in amounts that far exceeded any reasonable costs. By noon, I was sitting in a bank lobby with Grandma beside me, both of us holding manila envelopes full of documents. The banker, a middle-aged woman named Mrs. Chen, reviewed our papers with the careful attention of someone who'd seen this situation before. Mrs. Sheridan, she said to Grandma, I need to confirm that you want to remove Vera Sheridan from all of your accounts and add Celine as a co-owner. Grandma nodded firmly. Yes, I want Celine to help me now. Mrs. Chen made notes on her forms. And you understand that this will give Celine access to all of your financial information and the ability to make transactions on your behalf. I trust her, Grandma said simply. Mrs. Chen looked at me. Are you prepared for this responsibility? I thought about the promotion dinner I'd missed, the career advancement I'd walked away from, the life I'd been building in Chicago. Then I looked at Grandma, sitting small and brave in the oversized chair. Yes, I said. Right, we spent 2 hours signing forms, updating accounts, and securing Grandma's assets. By the time we left the bank, my mother's access to Grandma's money had been completely cut off. Someone's finally protecting her, Mrs. Chen said quietly as we gathered our papers. That's good to see. By the time we returned to Grandma's house, my phone was buzzing with notifications. I ignored them until we were settled in the living room, then finally looked at the screen. 17 missed calls from my mother, 23 text messages, and a Facebook post that made my blood run cold. Heartbroken to share that my daughter, who rarely visits, has somehow convinced my confused mother to sign over her assets. It's amazing how some people only show up when money is involved. Praying for my mother's protection and my daughter's soul. The post had been shared 14 times and had 37 comments, mostly from people I didn't know, expressing sympathy for my mother and concern for Grandma's well-being. A few former neighbors had commented, people who remembered me as a child but hadn't seen me in years. Oh no, not sweet little Celine! She seemed like such a good girl. Sometimes people change when they smell money. So sad. Maybe someone should do a welfare check on the grandmother. I felt sick. In less than 4 hours, my mother had crafted a narrative that painted me as a predatory granddaughter taking advantage of a confused elderly woman. And people believed her. People always believed her. My phone rang. It was my boss. Celine, I just saw something on Facebook. Are you okay? Some people are saying things about you and your grandmother. I stepped outside to take the call, pacing Grandma's front porch while I explained the situation. My boss listened without interrupting, then sighed. I believe you. But this is going to be a problem. Corporations don't like this kind of drama attached to senior positions. Maybe you should come back to Chicago and let your family sort this out. I can't do that. then you need to understand that the promotion might be off the table. At least for now. I hung up and sat on the porch steps, staring at the street where I'd learned to ride a bike, where I'd played with neighborhood kids who were now adults with their own families. This was supposed to be a simple birthday visit. Instead, it had become a war. But as I sat there, I realized something. I didn't care about the promotion. I didn't care about the Facebook post or the rumors or the damage to my reputation. For the first time in my life, I was doing something that mattered more than my career. I was protecting someone who couldn't protect herself. The court summons arrived 3 days later. My mother was petitioning for emergency guardianship of Grandma, claiming that I had manipulated a vulnerable elderly woman and that immediate intervention was necessary to protect her from financial abuse. The irony was breathtaking. I hired a lawyer, David Martinez, an elderly rights attorney recommended by Mrs. Chen at the bank. He reviewed our case with the thoroughness of someone who'd seen too many families torn apart by greed. "Your mother has a problem," he said, spreading the documents across his desk. "She's claiming your grandmother is incompetent, but she's also claiming that your grandmother was competent enough to sign over her assets to her. She can't have it both ways. What are our chances?" "Good, but we need to be prepared for anything. Your mother is going to paint you as an absent granddaughter who swooped in to steal an inheritance. She's going to say your grandmother is confused, that she doesn't understand what she's signing. But that's not true." "I know. But we need to prove it." The days leading up to the hearing were a blur of preparation. I gathered evidence, bank statements showing my mother's excessive withdrawals, testimony from neighbors who confirmed Grandma's mental clarity, and medical records showing she had no cognitive impairment. But the hardest part was explaining to Grandma that she would have to testify. "I don't want to go to court," she said, her hands shaking as she held her coffee cup. "I don't want to say bad things about your mother." "You don't have to say anything bad about her. You just have to tell the truth." "But she's my daughter. Even after everything, she's still my daughter." I understood. Love doesn't just disappear because someone hurts you. Sometimes it just makes the betrayal harder to bear. The Houston courthouse was an imposing building of gray stone and glass, designed to intimidate rather than comfort. I helped Grandma up the steps, her hand gripping mine tightly as we navigated the metal detectors and security checkpoints. She'd dressed carefully for the occasion. A navy blue dress with pearl buttons, her hair curled and pinned back, her best shoes polished to a shine. She looked fragile but dignified, like a queen going into battle. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, with wooden pews that reminded me of church and fluorescent lights that cast everything in harsh relief. My mother was already seated at the plaintiff's table, looking every inch the concerned daughter in a black suit that probably cost more than Grandma's monthly grocery budget. She didn't look at us when we entered. Didn't acknowledge Grandma's presence at all. The judge, a stern-faced woman in her 60s, called the court to order. My mother's lawyer spoke first, painting a picture of a confused elderly woman being taken advantage of by a granddaughter who had been absent for years. "Mrs. Sheridan suffers from age-related cognitive decline," the lawyer said, his voice smooth and confident. "She's been manipulated by her granddaughter, who has a history of limited contact with the family but suddenly appeared when significant assets were involved." Then my mother took the stand. She was masterful, I had to give her that. She spoke with tears in her eyes about her concern for Grandma's well-being, about the burden of caring for an aging parent, about the heartbreak of watching her daughter manipulate someone she loved. "I've been taking care of my mother for years," she said, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, "managing her finances, making sure her bills are paid, ensuring she's safe. And then my daughter, who lives 800 miles away and rarely visits, suddenly shows up and convinces her to sign over everything. It's elder abuse, Your Honor." The judge listened without expression, making notes on a legal pad. When my mother finished, it was our turn. David Martinez was methodical, presenting evidence of my mother's financial manipulation, the forged documents, and the suspicious withdrawals. He called Mrs. Chen from the bank, who testified about the suspicious nature of the transactions on Grandma's accounts. But the moment that changed everything was when Grandma took the stand. She walked slowly to the witness box, her cane tapping against the floor in a rhythm that seemed to echo through the silent courtroom. The bailiff helped her into the chair, and she looked around the room with curious eyes, as if she were seeing it for the first time. "Mrs. Sheridan," the judge said gently, "do you know where you are today?" Grandma blinked, looked around the room, then back at the judge. For a moment, she seemed confused, lost. My mother's lawyer leaned forward, ready to pounce on any sign of cognitive impairment. Then Grandma's eyes found mine. "I'm in court," she said clearly. "Because my daughter wants to take my house away from me." The silence that followed was deafening. You could hear the air conditioning humming, the scratch of the court reporter's pen, and the distant sound of traffic outside. "And who," the judge asked, "has been taking care of you recently?" Grandma looked directly at my mother, then back at me. "She's the only one who came," she said simply. "When everyone else was on vacation, she came to my birthday party. She's the only one who stayed." My mother's face crumpled. Not with sadness, but with rage barely contained. The judge sat back in her chair, her expression unreadable. "Mrs. Sheridan, do you understand what your daughter is asking this court to do? She wants to control my money," Grandma said. "She's been taking it without asking. I never said she could do that. And what do you want to happen?" Grandma looked at me again, and in that moment, I saw the woman she'd been before age and betrayal had worn her down. I saw the grandmother who'd taught me to make cookies, who'd driven me to school when my parents forgot, who'd always made me feel like I belonged somewhere. "I want Celine to help me," she said firmly. "I trust her." The judge's ruling was swift and decisive. Guardianship is granted to Celine Sheridan, with immediate effect. Mrs. Vera Sheridan's access to her mother's financial accounts is permanently revoked, and she is ordered to provide a full accounting of all transactions made on her mother's behalf over the past 12 months. Then the judge did something I didn't expect. She looked directly at my mother, her expression hardening. "What you did, Mrs. Sheridan, borders on criminal exploitation of a vulnerable adult. You should consider yourself fortunate that we're not pursuing criminal charges at this time." My mother stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. She looked at me with pure hatred, then at Grandma with something that might have been disappointment or disgust. Without a word, she walked out of the courtroom, her heels clicking against the floor like bullets. I expected to feel triumphant. Instead, I felt hollow. This wasn't a victory, it was a tragedy. A family had been destroyed, relationships had been severed, and an elderly woman had been forced to choose between her daughter and her granddaughter. But when I looked at Grandma, sitting small and brave in the witness box, I knew we'd made the right choice. Sometimes protecting someone you love means being willing to be the villain in someone else's story. We drove home in silence, both of us exhausted by the day's events. I helped Grandma into her house, made her a cup of tea, and settled her into her favorite recliner. She fell asleep almost immediately, her breathing soft and regular. I was washing dishes when I heard something slide under the front door. An envelope, white and crisp, with my name written in my mother's familiar handwriting. I opened it standing in the kitchen, my hands trembling slightly. "Celine," it began. "You were always her favorite. Even when you were little, I could see it in the way she looked at you. The way she saved special treats for you. The way she lit up when you walked into a room. I spent my whole life trying to earn that look, and I never could. I thought if I could take care of her, if I could manage her affairs and make sure she was safe, maybe she would finally see me the way she saw you. But it was never enough. And when I saw you come back and take over everything I'd worked for, I realized it never would be enough. I'm not sorry for trying to protect my inheritance. I'm not sorry for securing my future. But I am sorry that it came to this. I'm sorry that an old woman had to choose between her daughter and her granddaughter. You won. I hope you're happy." There was no signature, no closing. Just those words, written in the careful script I remembered from childhood birthday cards and school notes. I folded the letter carefully and put it in the drawer by the sink, next to the matches and the spare keys. It felt like the end of something, though I wasn't sure what. The weeks that followed were quiet. No dramatic confrontations, no angry phone calls. My mother had simply vanished from our lives, as if she'd never existed. I found myself looking for her in the grocery store, expecting her to call or text, but there was nothing. Just silence. I extended my leave from work, then eventually submitted my resignation. My boss was understanding, though I could hear the disappointment in her voice. The promotion went to someone else, and I watched my Chicago life fade away through a series of forwarded emails and canceled subscriptions. But something strange happened as I settled into life in Houston. I began to remember who I'd been before I'd moved away, before I'd buried myself in work and ambition. I remembered the girl who'd helped her grandmother in the garden, who'd spent summer afternoons reading on the front porch, who'd felt safe and loved in this house. I started redecorating, removing the sterile family photos my mother had hung and replacing them with real memories. I found boxes of pictures in the attic, me as a gap-toothed child standing beside Grandma in her garden, the two of us at church picnics and school plays, moments of genuine joy and connection. In one box, I found something that made me cry, the bracelet Grandma had given me when I was 8, the one with the broken string that she'd promised to fix. She'd kept it all these years, waiting for me to come back for it. I had it restrung at a local jewelry shop, and when I gave it back to her, she smiled for the first time in weeks. "I told you I'd fix it," she said, slipping it onto her wrist where it belonged. About a month after the court hearing, I started receiving calls from family members I hadn't spoken to in years. My cousin Melissa from Oregon was the first. "I had no idea what was happening," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "If I'd known, I would have helped, we all would have helped." One by one, they reached out. Cousins, family friends, people who'd been kept in the dark by my mother's careful manipulation. They'd been told I was too busy with work to care about family, that I'd grown distant and cold. They'd believed her because they'd had no reason not to. But word travels fast in extended families, and the truth had a way of spreading. Soon, I was receiving casseroles and cards, offers to help with groceries and doctor's appointments. People who'd been strangers for years became allies in the simple act of caring for an elderly woman who'd been forgotten by her children. Mrs. Patterson from next door started coming over for coffee. Mr. and Mrs. Chen from the bank sent flowers. Even the mailman, a jovial man,